poor Neanderthals. For more than a century, their bones have been treated as mirrors for our own reflection. From the moment their remains were pulled from the cold soil of Europe, we have used them to tell a story about ourselves, a story of superiority, of progress, of being the chosen kind of human. We looked at their sloping foreheads and heavy brows and saw beasts, not brothers. Yet every discovery, every skull and fragment keeps whispering something different. It tells us that perhaps the line dividing us from them was never as clear as we once believed. What truly lived inside a Neanderthal's skull? We have never held one of their brains in our hands. No specimen lies frozen in ice. No perfect relic preserved in time. All we have are traces, the faint inner impressions of skulls that once protected minds as vivid as ours. And still, those traces speak volumes. With modern tools like CT scans and digital reconstruction, scientists are now peering into the hidden spaces once filled with thought. They find patterns of complexity, symmetry, and organization that mirror our own. But this story is not only about fossils or neurons. It is also about us, the descendants who still carry fragments of their DNA. Deep in our genes, echoes of Neanderthal life continue to resonate. Some of their traits shape our bodies, some influence how our brains work even today. So before we rush to call them primitive, perhaps we should look again. The Neanderthals were not a failed experiment. They were another version of being human, born for colder winds and harsher lands, yet capable of memory, emotion, and wonder. Their story challenges us to rethink what it means to be modern, and maybe what it means to be human at all. For decades, the Neanderthal skull has been both evidence and accusation. In dusty museums and bright lecture halls, its long vault and heavy brow ridges became proof of backwardness, the perfect image of a mind that never quite caught up. The story began in the 19th century, when early scholars tried to measure intelligence by filling skulls with mustard seeds, millet, or even water, then pouring the contents into glass cylinders. The picture was almost absurd, scientists kneeling beside ancient bones, shaking seeds into hollow spaces, and calling it the measure of a mind. Yet from those primitive methods came a surprising truth. Even then, the Neanderthal brain turned out to be enormous on average, as large as, or slightly larger than ours. The numbers they recorded, ranging from about 1,170 to 1,740 cubic centimeters, sat squarely inside the human range, and sometimes beyond it. That discovery should have changed the conversation, but it did not. Instead, people clung to what they could see. The forehead sloped back, the jaw jutted forward, the rear of the skull bulged into a bun. To many, these shapes looked savage, and so they assumed the mind inside must be simple. The logic was tidy but false. Modern research has shown that external contours say little about mental power. The brain fills whatever space the skull provides. There are modern humans today with equally slanted foreheads, yet no one calls them less intelligent. What lies beneath matters far more than the silhouette. With today's technology, scientists no longer rely on seeds or water. Computed tomography scanning, CT scanning, allows them to recreate digital endocasts, perfect virtual molds of ancient brains, and the results are astonishing. Inside the Neanderthal skull, the inner surfaces reveal folds and asymmetries almost identical to our own. The frontal lobes, the regions linked to planning, memory, and social awareness, show no sign of reduction. The parietal areas, where vision and movement intertwine, are equally sophisticated. A study from the Max Planck Institute in 2022 added something remarkable. It suggested that Neanderthal brains may have developed more slowly during childhood, giving their neural circuits more time to mature. This slower growth pattern could mean a longer period for learning, play, and memory formation traits that mirror our own human advantage. It hints at lives rich in experience, not limited by instinct. When we look again, the evidence points not to deficiency, but to diversity. The Neanderthal skull was a product of different circumstances: colder climates, greater muscle mass, heavier faces built to handle tough living. The shape we once mocked was simply the mark of adaptation, not inferiority. Each curve and ridge was a response to survival, not a sign of stupidity. So when we picture that famous profile with its sloped brow and massive jaw, we should remember that form does not dictate thought. The real story lies inside the hidden architecture of a brain that could imagine, remember, and decide. In those ancient vaults of bone, there lived minds that observed, reasoned, and cared. The misunderstanding began with measurements, but it ends with understanding. The Neanderthal skull was not a cage for a lesser mind. It was the home of another kind of human, one that thought differently but deeply, just as we do today. When we talk about the size of the Neanderthal brain, it is easy to forget that the brain does not exist alone. It serves a body, and that body lived in one of the harshest environments ever faced by human beings. Neanderthals were built for endurance. Their bones were thick, their muscles powerful, their chests wide, and their metabolisms worked like furnaces to keep them alive in freezing Ice Age winters. A larger body demands more neural control, more muscle coordination, more sensory feedback, more energy regulation. In that light, their bigger brains make perfect sense. The extra volume was not wasted space but a biological investment in survival. The old myth said, big brain equals smart. Then came the opposite myth, big brain equals primitive. The truth, as usual, sits quietly in between. The size of the Neanderthal brain reflected not superiority or inferiority, but adaptation. Cold climates increase the need for heat production and visual awareness. Long nights require alertness and memory of safe routes. Heavy muscles need precise timing and coordination. Their brain was tuned to a world that demanded constant physical and mental calculation. Recent evidence from a young Neanderthal skeleton discovered in El Cedron cave in Spain makes the picture even clearer. The child, about 7 or 8 years old, already had a brain volume of roughly 1,330 cubic centimeters, almost 87% of an adult's. That tells us that brain growth was rapid and efficient, reaching adult capacity early. It suggests a developmental pattern focused on learning from direct experience, mastering complex movements, and responding swiftly to the environment. But survival in the Ice Age was not just about cold or muscle. The environment was also chemically hostile. A study from the University of California, San Diego, in 2025, revealed that early humans, including Neanderthals, were often exposed to lead from ancient soils and water. For them, this heavy metal could quietly damage developing brains. Interestingly, modern humans carry a variant of a gene called NOVA1, which appears to protect neural connections from such toxicity. The difference may have given our ancestors a small but meaningful edge in long-term brain resilience. Still, that advantage does not make Neanderthals less. It simply shows how thin the margins of evolution can be, how survival sometimes turns on a single genetic shield. Everything else about their brains fits the pattern of power and complexity. They had to remember every valley and trail, feel the shift of wind across rock, sense the timing of a hunt, and recognize the faces of those they depended on. Their intelligence was not spent on writing or architecture, but on staying alive, reading nature like a language written in snow and sky. So when we compare our brains to theirs, we are not looking at two ranks on a ladder. We are looking at two branches of the same tree, each shaped by the world it grew in, each bending towards survival in its own way. The deeper scientists look inside the Neanderthal skull, the more the old assumptions begin to unravel. Modern imaging has replaced the crude methods of the past. With high-resolution CT scans and digital modeling, researchers can reconstruct every curve of the inner cavity and simulate the brain that once filled it. What they find is both familiar and strange. The Neanderthal brain followed the same general blueprint as ours, but the balance of its parts was subtly different. Their skulls were longer from front to back, their faces larger, their eyes set in wider sockets. To early researchers, this shape seemed to scream primitive. But when those features were examined in detail, a new story appeared, one of adaptation, not regression. One study focused on the unusually large eye sockets of Neanderthals. The team proposed that these ancient humans had bigger eyes and therefore larger visual cortices, the parts of the brain responsible for processing sight. It made sense in a world of dim light and long winters. Bigger eyes could have captured more of the scarce sunlight filtering through ice age clouds, while an expanded visual cortex would have sharpened perception and spatial memory. Another group of scientists added that such adaptations might have come at a cost. If more brain tissue was devoted to vision and movement, perhaps less was available for symbolic thinking or social networking. It was a compelling hypothesis, but not the final word. Many neuroscientists now urge caution. They remind us that the brain is not a collection of isolated compartments. It is a living network, flexible and self-repairing. A slight increase in one area does not mean a deficit in another. The most recent MRI-based reconstructions show that the overall pattern of Neanderthal brain folds, the convolutional maps of thought and sensation matches that of modern humans almost perfectly. In essence, their neural architecture was different in balance but equal in sophistication. A 2018 analysis of the Neanderthal cerebellum, the region involved in coordination, language rhythm, and learning, suggested it might have been a bit smaller than ours. Some took this as a sign of reduced cultural capacity, yet the difference was within the normal range seen among living humans today. The cerebellum varies widely without changing intelligence. It works as part of a distributed system, one that allows behaviors to emerge from cooperation between regions, not competition. To understand this, computer scientists have even modeled Neanderthal cognition, using modern frameworks like the Petri net approach, mapping how they might have planned and sequenced complex tasks such as producing tar for tools. The results reveal structured decision-making, memory, and inhibition, the same trio of abilities that define executive thinking in us. So the debate continues, but its direction has shifted. The question is no longer whether Neanderthals were smart. The real question is what kind of intelligence they had, and how it reflected the world they lived in. Their brains were tuned for precision, perception, and endurance, a harmony suited to an unforgiving Earth, yet unmistakably human in its design. For a long time, Neanderthals were described as creatures of brute force, living short, harsh lives among glaciers and caves. But new discoveries have rewritten that picture into something far richer and more human. Archaeological sites across Europe and Western Asia reveal a species that cared for one another, planned their hunts, and remembered their dead. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, the skeleton of an injured Neanderthal who lived for years after losing an arm suggests that others must have tended to him. In La Chapelle-aux-Saints, France, a body was laid gently in a shallow grave, surrounded by tools. These gestures speak of empathy and awareness of minds that could imagine the meaning of loss. Even their daily habits tell a different story. Evidence from El Cidrón Cave in Spain shows traces of pine nuts, mushrooms, moss, and even medicinal plants embedded in ancient dental plaque. These people were not mere scavengers of meat. They understood their environment, selecting food and herbs that suited their needs. DNA from the same site revealed that they carried the FOXP2 gene, a key element of speech and language development that modern humans also possess. This means they could very likely speak, teach, and tell stories. Their world was quieter than ours, but it was not silent. Their brains, large and complex, powered societies built on close ties. Small groups worked together, shared knowledge, and passed skills through direct apprenticeship. Every gesture, every glance had meaning. Their intelligence was practical, embodied in movement and memory rather than written words or painted walls. Still, the absence of surviving art does not mean the absence of imagination. Most human cultures throughout history have left no statues or paintings behind, yet they dreamed, sang, and loved. Neanderthals were no different. What makes this story even more remarkable is that it did not end with their extinction. We carry traces of them in our blood. Modern genetic studies reveal that people outside Africa share 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA. Those fragments influence our immune systems, our metabolism, even the shape of our skulls. Some studies suggest they play roles in neurological conditions such as autism spectrum disorder or Chiari malformation conditions linked to how the brain and spine fit together. In a sense, part of their biology still whispers within us, shaping our thoughts and vulnerabilities. This genetic inheritance reminds us that we are not separate from them. We are their continuation. Every heartbeat, every spark of memory, carries echoes of a species that endured for hundreds of thousands of years across icy plains and mountain passes. When we look at a map of their migrations from Spain to Siberia, we are also tracing the first outlines of ourselves. Their story is not one of failure but of transformation. They merged into us, leaving behind more than bones. They left instincts, perceptions, and a way of understanding the world that helped us survive. In that sense, the Neanderthals never truly vanished. They live in our faces, in our genes, and in the ancient patterns of our brains. The line between them and us dissolves. What remains is the shared pulse of humanity, beating across time, carrying forward the memory of those who came before. When we stand before the story of the Neanderthals, what we are really facing is a reflection of ourselves. For generations, we called them simple, brutish, or unfinished, because it comforted us to believe that we alone were special. Yet everything we now know about them whispers another truth. Their brains were large, their thoughts complex, their lives filled with endurance and meaning. They survived unimaginable winters. They loved and cared, they remembered and mourned. If that is not human, then what is? The prejudice began with the shape of a skull and grew into an entire mythology of superiority. But the curve of a forehead or the thickness of a brow ridge does not define a mind. Science has shown that the Neanderthal brain was not poor or primitive. It was a variation on the same magnificent theme. The differences were not hierarchies but harmonies, subtle adjustments to a different climate, a different rhythm of life. They were not our inferiors. They were our kin. It is humbling to realize how easily we used their image to elevate our own. We built a story where intelligence meant art, language, and cities, forgetting that wisdom also lies in endurance, in memory, in quiet understanding. The Neanderthals remind us that humanity wears many faces. Intelligence is not a race to the top, but a spectrum of ways to live, to feel, to adapt. Today, pieces of their DNA still guide our biology and shape our minds. In that sense, they never truly disappeared. They walk with us in every cell, every nerve, every dream. The echo of their world continues in ours, their resilience, their perception, their quiet strength. To dismiss them as lesser is to misunderstand the miracle of variation that made us who we are. So when we imagine those ancient faces lit by firelight, looking up at the same stars we see tonight, we should not look down on them but across to them. They are not the ghosts of a failed species. They are the other side of the mirror, reminding us that humanity has always been plural, diverse, and astonishing. The Neanderthal brain was never poor. It was simply tuned to another song of the earth, and that melody still plays within us.